So I think with the foreign fighter issue, one of the main things that we've noticed is people leaving from all over the world to go fight abroad in a conflict like Syria and Iraq. And I think what scares people most about this notion of the foreign fighter, people who are abroad, is the fact that they could get some kind of training when they're there, make certain kinds of connections with international terrorism, and come back to their home country and either launch attacks or train others to launch attacks. And so that fear has been elevated as of late with things like Paris and events like Brussels. But I think even with those kinds of events, we need to divide up the foreign fighter, the notion of the foreign fighter, or the notion of the returning foreign fighter into several different components. So the first ones are people like the ones that carried out Paris and Brussels, who are, more and more evidence shows, were specifically handpicked and sent back to launch attacks. Then there are the others who leave because they're genuinely disillusioned with what's going on in Syria, either left to go join groups like the Islamic State or Jabhat al-Nusra, left looking for utopia, and found something very different and decided to come back. The third group, which is a little bit more interesting, are people who are neither disillusioned or operational in terms of wanting to come back and launch attacks, but are these kind of disengaged individuals who have left the conflict zone for a variety of very non-ideological reasons, because they wanted to get married, because they're just kind of tired of the conflict, exhausted with war fatigue, being in the battle, in the theater of conflict for several years at a time, just kind of exhausted with the conflict. So they return back home or to some other third country, and they're not necessarily disillusioned. They're still very committed to jihadi movements and then the broader movement of broader social movement of jihad, but they're not actively engaged at the moment. And so there are also individuals that we need to keep track of, because they could become activated fairly easily under certain conditions. So I think groups like the Islamic State, force us to rethink this notion of the foreign fighter as this kind of uniform, threatening individual who's well trained and sent back to wreak havoc in the West and so on. I think we've seen a lot of evidence of young girls leaving. We've seen a lot of evidence of entire families getting up and leaving, and so for them to want to come back because either they're disillusioned with the Islamic State or something, or the Islamic State is eventually defeated. I think these are prime contenders for being reintegrated into the West, and could, if they're coming back remorseful and disillusioned, could actually be quite useful for prevention strategies going forward. I think what a lot of Canadians need to realize when it comes to this notion of the returning foreign fighter is that Canada already has dozens and dozens of returned foreign fighters who have gone on with their lives and reintegrated into society. I think when we're talking about returnees, we really need to ask the question of when they left, who they fought with, and why they returned. Because and so that allows us to kind of see these individuals in all of their diversity, and not kind of pigeonhole them into one scary kind of uniform conception of what they are. Particularly because if they are coming back disillusioned, if they are coming back remorseful, they could be quite useful for things like prevention strategies, talking to other youth who are interested in going, and helping us conceive of some kind of counter-narrative and prevention strategy.